From Victorian London's fashionable West End to the squalid slums and alleys of the East End, there were haunts of lawlessness and vice, from which the clientele of the capital's police courts were largely drawn. Known today as a magistrate's court, a police court is the lowest level of court in England and Wales. Here, all the darker side of London life accumulated in legal cases as serious as burglary and highway robbery, to an endless stream of lesser law-breaking, false cheques, difficult tenants, theft, drunkenness, quarrels and assault, the complaints and dilemmas of the working class that sought assistance and counsel from the poor man's lawyer before appearing to a magistrate for sentencing, himself weary of passing judgement on a never-ending tale of human woe. Today, in a genuine account from 1878, you will discover the characters you could meet in a typical day at the capital's most famous court, Bow Street Police Court, London. Many famous people accused of crimes passed through Bow Street Police Court, often before being committed to Central Criminal Court, including Dr Crippen, William Joyce, Oscar Wilde, as well as Emmeline and Chistabel Pankhurst. In this video, however, you will learn about the crimes of which some of the everyday people of London were accused and the sentences they received from the magistrate, all the while watched and jeered by a mob baying in the public gallery, betting on how long a prisoner would be sent down. Before we move on, please consider clicking the subscribe button for more content like this. If you find this video interesting, I would really appreciate it if you could give it a thumbs up and share it widely with friends and family. Please check out the description to see how you can support the channel and the content we make. The spectacle of the prestigious rogues who lately figured 3 times a week before Sir James Ingham at Bow Street Police Court may be likened, as compared with the miserably small fry that usually make their appearance before his worship, to a brace of voracious sharks floundering in a herring net. It is, fortunately, not often that such leviathans of ocean intrude in the shallow and turbid waters over which a stipendiary magistrate has jurisdiction, to disturb the retailing of justice to young beginners in the criminal business and to the old hands who, if success were invariably the reward of industry, would have retired to Portland years ago, but who, owing to physical or mental incapacity, drag on to the end of their tether in the humble paths of petty larceny. A morning at Bow Street, and a morning at any other of the Metropolitan Police Courts, just now exhibits a remarkable difference. In the ordinary course of events, it must be dreadfully dreary work, occupying the judicial bench from 10 in the morning till 4 or 5 in the afternoon, in an ill-ventilated and evil-smelling apartment, with nothing to vary the depressing monotony of sights and sounds, but an occasional exceptionally fresh-coloured young policeman, or a smart female witness, with now and again a sharp passage of arms between the solicitors at their table. Apart from these godsends, a magistrate must find it terribly slow work. It is always the same picture, always the railed-off space as a background, crowded with an unwashed public, consisting for the most part of the outer work part of the population, or those who are too lazy to seek employment, and who find this a cheap and agreeable way of killing time. They are not all of this kind, however. As sure as the doors are opened, there will be a flock to the front of this public space, as many as it will hold of villainous-looking men and lads with heads close cropped, or of the crow's nest pattern, who by some mysterious influence are drawn hither, evincing a greedy interest in the proceedings. They lean their ragged elbows on the bright barrier bar, and as a rule suck the same, as though the everlasting criminal atmosphere of the court had imparted to it a refreshing flavour, grateful to their vitiated palate, although manifestly of the same family as regards an instinctive relish for this kind of amusement. They hold no communication with each other during the proceedings, except an occasional push with the knee or a dig with the elbow to call attention to points specially worth noting. But as each case is drawing to a conclusion, and there arrives the anxious moment when his worship, having heard the evidence in silence, purses his lips and knits his brow, pondering the sentence. The eyes in the villainous front row of heads light up, and by means of dumb motions of their lips they telegraph to each other their idea of how many months of imprisonment will be the prisoner's doom. 4, 3, 6. Their experience is so extensive that really there should not be this wide difference of opinion. But then the law is so delightfully uncertain, and it is almost as good fun as betting on racehorses to indulge in this friendly rivalry of guesswork. 3 months it is, and the lanky youth who had so guessed it looks for the moment as pleased as though he had won money. The dry details as set forth in the newspaper police reports give but a poor idea of the queer jumble of cases to which it is his worship's duty to patiently listen and give judgment on. Such miserably poor and paltry cases, most of them, that the money involved in 500 would not amount to nearly as much as one well-known company confess to having swindled a too confiding public out of in a single day. Call the next case, and a door at the back of the court is grudgingly opened as though the space beyond was stocked with cases that would take flight like birds from an aviary if they were not well looked after, and the court policeman, who is no more like the being that does duty on beat than a sheep-dog is like a pet poodle, conducts to a breadth of raised planking hedged in fore and aft with an iron bar, and called to the dock, a haggard and hungry-looking wretch, grey-headed and tattered, and with dried mud on the back of his coat, as though he had been down in the road. He owns to the name of John Sparrow, and his offence is that the evening previously he had endeavoured to steal from the shop of Amos Levi a coat valued at 18 shillings. The case is as perfect as a case can be. There is the coat, muddy as when picked up after the prisoner had thrown it down. There is Amos Levi. There is the detective who watched the prisoner for nearly half an hour, walking to and fro before he ventured to make a snatch at the garment. The front row in the public compartment exchange glances which denote their contempt for John Sparrow when this last bit of evidence is given, and even the detective appears to think that it is a damaging feature in the case. Not so, however, his worship on the bench, negligently posed, and drumming with his fingers on the knee he is nursing. He raises his head for a moment, and gives John Sparrow a glance that, to the shrewd observer, conveys nothing to the wretched prisoner's disfavour. Possibly in his mind's eye he can see the man now before him, driven to desperate extremes, and fascinated by that slop-made coat, beckoning, "Come and steal me," as it swung in the wind, neglected and unguarded, outside Mr. Levi's shop. "Hang it," mutters gaunt John Sparrow. "Hang it, I'm a good mind. I will too." And he walks towards the temptation, sternly gulping down his honest heart, that seems inclined to leap out of his mouth and go and tell of him. But at the last moment his screwed-up courage falls slack, and he passes on, and he passes, and repasses, the detective in the shadow of a doorway on the opposite side, confounding him for keeping him waiting so long, for half an hour, and those 30 minutes of prolonged cold and emptiness act as the final straw that breaks down his virtuous forbearance. The deed is done, and he is to answer for it. "Is anything known of him?" his worship asks. No, not by the police, that is to say, but the aggrieved Mr. Amos, whose slop-coat is certainly all the worse for being dropped in the mud, and who was greatly agitated at the prospect of the robber getting off with anything less than 6 months' hard labour, here exclaims, "I know him, your worship. Why, you'd hardly think it, but he actually worked for me till 4 months ago, when his 2 children died of smallpox, and I took the work away from him." "Who have you been working for since that time, prisoner?" the magistrate asks. "I haven't pulled a needle since that time," replies John Sparrow in grim despair. "I've had 'em down, off and on, 5 of 'em, since that time, Why, Lord send I'd ha' caught it and died myself. It would have been better for me. Mr. Amos nods his head, as though he has reason for thinking so too. 6 weeks hard labour, pronounced his worship, which was a merciful sentence, inasmuch as he might have said 6 months instead. But the unfortunate tailor is too thoroughly mazed in a black fog of despair to appreciate the magistrate's kind forbearance. 6 weeks, 6 months, 6 years. What does it matter when it has come to this? If all the cases that come before his worship were of a like nature, his would be but a doleful duty indeed. But a great part of his duty, though disagreeable enough, is not very distressing when once he has grown seasoned to it. For instance, nobody but older men think of trying the saving effects of a moral drawn on the abuse of alcohol on every drunk and incapable who is brought before them. Short work is made of each morning's batch of inebriates by the metropolitan magistrates. Unless the offence has been aggravated by violence, the cases are put down almost as fast as they are put up. It is dirty work at best, and the sooner it is cleared off, the better, and 6 lines next morning in the newspaper contain all the public knows, or wishes to know, about the matter. But it will often happen that a magisterial decision is given 6 lines, or even less, that go but a little way towards conveying the story. Take, for example, the brief few words. The prisoner, who was brought up on remand, was discharged for want of further evidence. That was all that was said concerning the case that came next, but one to that of the wretched journeyman tailor, but to an eye-witness. It was a thrilling romance in its way. He was a lithe, built, brutal-looking ruffian of 25 or so, with a chest and a pair of shoulders that contrasted strangely with his ghastly paleness and his whining, cowardly aspect. He was charged with knocking down a gentleman at midnight in the neighbourhood of King's Cross, with intent to rob him. A policeman arriving suddenly on the spot found the gentleman on the ground and the prisoner standing over him, and when the officer attempted to lay hands on him, he took to his heels, but was captured. The gentleman had failed to appear at the first hearing, and the prisoner was remanded, and now again brought up. If there had been the least doubt as to the villain's guilt, it would have been set at rest by the desperately eager glance he cast about him, tiptoeing while in the dock to do it, in order to find out if the dreaded witness was present. He appeared to be much more at ease after the survey, and was so still when some person among the crowd coughed in a loud and peculiar manner. There, however, still remained the policeman who had caught the young fellow in the act, and his testimony might be sufficient to send the accused to prison for a lengthy term, at any rate. But the policeman, as it happened, was a blundering countryman, new to the force, and the peculiarly sharp solicitor the young fellow's friends had contrived to engage baffled him so with his questions that the poor constable was presently made to prevaricate and stammer in a nervous manner. What the sharp solicitor wanted to show was that his innocent client, seeing a gentleman prostrate on the pavement, was in the act of rendering him humane assistance, when the policeman unwarrantably pounced on him. "Is there any further evidence against the prisoner?" the magistrate presently exclaimed, pardonably impatient at the constable's floundering. "No? Then the prisoner is discharged," to the so great amazement of the latter that he at first stared incredulously at the magistrate, and then laughed outright, while, equally unable to retain his emotion, the owner of a voice in the crowd loudly exclaimed, "Beat him again!" and then darted gladly out of court, to be followed presently by the lucky young garroter who had experienced such a narrow escape.